So Satan and Faye escape the forest into the deserts of the main continent, seeing overhead as the forest thins a warship of Gebler, who has said is currently collaborating with Eva forces, after the Solarians decided to more overtly intervene in the Kislev-Eva conflict, so one side wouldn't entirely wipe the other out. Yeah, spoilers, they're getting something out of the conflict, thus have been facilitating its continuance for centuries. Which brings us to the desert border town of Dazil, where I almost immediately get lost. This is why I don't really review many games from before the PS2 GameCube GBA era, people. I have this horrible habit in RPGs of getting completely lost, as I can't distinguish landmarks. It's actually why I grew a loathing of games with large overworlds. The inability to figure out what to do to trigger the next event grated on me something awful. And it's not really the game's fault on this. I have amazing spatial awareness that helps me navigate to most places after I've been there once, in the real world. But with games, I can't exactly apply that sixth sense in the same way. So it helps if there's a helpful landmark or map providing some direction to what I should be doing that just isn't here. Games would not think to start including them until some time after this, so my habit of getting lost and not knowing what to do in such circumstances would go unassisted for some time. I have not experienced this in Xenoblade to the same extent though I did admittedly get lost in Xenoblade's starting region because I wasn't used to the interface yet. What I will blame the game for is not anchoring the perspective of the character to make it easier to identify landmarks, and that is what actually exasperates my problem. As the capacity to 360-degree rotate the camera in this angle completely disorients me when I'm already having a hard enough time identifying locations and landmarks here. And unfortunately, changing the camera's orientation to see doors and obstacles that are made just out of sight of the familiar angle is what screws me up in this game. Final Fantasy VII had fixed cameras, but while Xenogears is more advanced on this, not every tech advancement done at this time was a good thing. Regardless, Dazil would normally be helpful for Satan getting the Welltel back in operational order, as the town was built around one of the Eldridge ruins, and they've been digging up gears and parts for them for the longest time. One wonders why they don't consider manufacturing their own by this point, what with all the lost technology they can build them out from, but the entire concept of lost technology means stuff that's rediscovered could still plausibly be more advanced than what a lot of the peoples of this world may have come up with on their own. Unfortunately, the crews here do not have the parts Satan needs, and due to the gear Ellie landed in being an experimental Kislev gear her team stole, alongside the Welltail also being a high-power Kislev gear, the prior activity with the battles at Faye's village will likely mean if they don't move the gears in their possession soon, both Eva and Kislev forces will descend on the village's region again, and another fight would break out over them. Satan thinks he might be able to find some wreck machines in the desert that can supply what they need for the constant battles across the region, but it's no guarantee, leading to the pair renting a transport buggy so they're not just getting lost in the desert. But frustratingly, Satan leaves Faye behind, Faye chasing after him, only to see a pair of Eva military gears race off in the same direction as Satan traveled, leading Faye to chase after him into the unrelenting harsh reality of the endless desert. On one hand, this was a bad idea to split the party in the first place like this. On the other, Faye wasn't exactly thinking straight when he did this, as Satan did warn him of the danger of wandering into the desert without proper supplies. This entire sequence of events, however, ends up entirely pointless, as Faye's rush to find Satan is negated when Faye just ends up attacked by different gears with Satan coming in the Welltel fully repaired, which could have just been done in the city and not needed this pointless diversion. Even better, it would have worked to better justify the trauma from the original Lahan incident as actually being Faye's fault if such a calamity were to happen in another town he just happened to be in. As right after Faye gets the Welltel back, he comes under attack by one of the major antagonists of the game, Graf, and his own superpowered gear, the Alpha, or rather, the original Welltel. And why doing things this way would better parallel the Lahan incident and put it more into Faye's head that he was responsible for the prior incident? Well, here's the new revelation about that. Graf set it up, with the explicit purpose of getting Faye to wake up his superpowered evil side for his own purposes. Meaning, Graf was responsible for it because Faye was there. Graf learned he was there and rerouted the mission Ellie was involved in for the explicit purpose of making a battle happen there. Thus, you justify blaming him for it while also not making it his fault, as it's this asshole being behind it, which then cycles back around the reincarnation plot as Graf is actually an aberrant incarnation of Abel that splintered off from him as a separate soul hijacking other people to maintain its own existence, and Faye's current state of possessing a splintered psyche via dissociative identity disorder is preventing Graf from his true goal of taking over and reintegrating into the latest reincarnation of his true self. Graf, in persona terms, is the shadow. This, incidentally, was what I was talking about in the first video of the game possessing psychological themes that are poorly explained and explored, in part because of such being needlessly complicated by the reincarnation plot, making it so expansion on one is constantly being confused with the other. The three Fays seen here representing the ego, the superego, and id, to the point Faye's superpowered evil side is literally named id. For those not familiar with Freudian psychology, the id is one's instinctual desire. The superego is the nagging voice in the back of your head that is always criticizing one's actions and bringing morality into one's thoughts that holds back the id's impulses. And the ego, the mediator between the two, as the realistic self that decides what can and cannot be done based upon the strongest impulses sent from one's id and superego. Graf is thus a separate manifestation of the superego of one of Faye's past lives, which consequently has made his id in this incarnation insanely strong after the experiments that were done to Faye as a child, making it manifest as the aforementioned dissociated identity. There's also this whole thing attached to that, which Freudian psychology connected to the concept of the Oedipus and Electra complex, i.e. children wanting their paramours to be like the parents that raised them, which in turn factors into this game as, well, remember there were only 2 original survivors of the Eldritch crash, and the humanity that sprang forth in this world had to come from somewhere. And remember what I said about Ailey also riding a cycle of reincarnation? Yeah, again, what is going on in the Xeno series is not difficult to explain, it just unnecessarily complicates itself with how it presents what is going on. And here immediately is another example of that. Graf gives up the entire planned endgame of the story right here and now. Because of Faye's role in the cycle of reincarnation, he and he alone has the ability to kill the god of this world, Deus. However, a mentally fractured Faye as he is incapable of channeling the power needed to do so. And as Graf does not explain the minutiae of why the god of this world needs to die, of course Faye is going to be against it, and rejects participation towards Graf's scheme, which by the end of the game he ends up doing anyways. For despite being a manifestation of the past Faye's superego, he has clearly fully embraced the logical self, one that does not consider any importance to attachments, and the well-being of those around them, as that empathy is instinctual. Thus Graf's actions towards others are consequently heartless, as the moral imperative part of the superego Graf represents takes precedence over the emotional well-being of those he needs to involve in his scheme. As a lot of what is shown to be wrong in this world, yeah, once more spoilers for the endgame of the story, it's Deus attempting to rebuild itself and leave the planet again to attack Earth, and the varied conflicts and actions of many characters in the game being caused by its created minions manipulating the other factions in this world. Thus, Graf's ultimate goal is in the right. However, the way it is going about all of it is all wrong due to its complete lack of empathy. And as a consequence, a lot of Graf's actions are responsible for the suffering Faye faces. To try and hone him into the man his past self failed to be, and use his connection with Deus, what allowed his Abel incarnation to survive Deus' destruction of the Elridge in the first place, to ultimately shut this malfunctioning monster down. Thus, Graf sicks another monster on Faye to drive him down that path, the battle causing the World's Hall to fail again as the repairs Satan made were temporary to just get it away from the Lahan ruins. leading them to be caught by an Eva patrol, arrested, and then loaded onto a sand cruiser that is subsequently attacked by a raiding pirate band commanded by the eye-patch-wearing Bartholomew Fatima, or just Bart for short. He and his pirate crew man the all-terrain transport the Yggdrasil, which over the course of the game comes to be our primary base of operations. The ship eventually being upgraded to not just travel amidst the sands, but across the seas and eventually the skies. Once more, Takahashi and Tanaka started out as scenario writers for the early Final Fantasy games, where you usually get a land transport, then a sea transport, before finally unlocking the airship by which to re-explore the entire map. So of course, with this still being a Square game, that pattern is repeated here. It is thankfully not done so in the subsequent games, as this means the progression just got old with how overtrended it ended up feeling, with how many games outright copied it. Still, Bart is an overall nice guy and solid companion, once we actually recruit him. His backstory hasn't been the rightful ruler of Ava, but he was ousted from control by his uncle Shakan, who was a member of the Ethos priesthood, so ended up becoming a pirate to raid for him and his loyalists the supplies they needed to eventually end Shakan's control over the country, as Shakan is, in fact, a Giebler puppet who is facilitating the conflict between their country and Kislev. Not that any of that is easy to recall despite its relevance to the early story. The entire walls of text that provide that can be explained in a paragraph backstory had me glazing my eyes over to miss the important details of that, as the walls of text blotted out what part of those paragraphs was important. As the game went on, I legitimately forgot what Bart's backstory was, as the absolute deluge of information made the relevance of a lot of that be lost beyond him being a pirate. Regardless, his assault on the carrier that captured Faye and Satan leads to sand pouring into the brig, threatening to drown the pair and requiring us race to escape the bowels of the ship before it completely goes under. Which leads to me failing a lot at that due to the difficulty in navigation I experience all game long. The pair manage to get to the Waltall and jump from the ship, but Bart believes Faye and Satan to be Ava's soldiers fleeing without care for comrades, which he won't abide by from his former homeland. As opposed to them being prisoners that keep being at the wrong place at the wrong time, and he is not willing to listen to how plausible that possibility is, considering Faye is not in an Ava originating machine. Yeah, get used to that. This game does this a lot with various cast members not actually listening to what the fuck others try and say, despite them all being fucking honest with each other. I got sick of this story trope years and years ago, and considering the Xeno series had some influence on some works after it, who knows on whether this absolutely frustrating miscommunication trope might have originated from here. I know I should cut this game more slack due to its age. I've just never really seen a story that uses this crap in a way that makes it freaking work. So yeah, we have to fight Bart in his Brigadier gear, which attacks enemies with an armored whip that doesn't actually do that much damage. Oh, Bart becomes an essential party member, but the damage tables for a lot of these machines, even when they're fully upgraded, end up being kind of awful despite him actually having the highest base attack of all of the early party members. Bart attacking us leads to both mechs disrupting the sand enough that they fall into a pit hidden underneath the desert. Bart blaming Faye for that, despite Bart being the one that attacked us and we were just defending ourselves. Seriously, the story doing this the entire way through really irritates me. But once the pair finally get out of their mechs once they're safe enough in a cave, Bart is allowed to see how absolutely wrong he was, and thus he admits his part in this major fuck-up. And because Bart is a practical man, agrees to team up to escape the caves beneath the sand they've now found themselves in, which once more bears relics from the Eldritch Crash, and a lot of monsters that require you do a lot of damage to them to actually beat them, since you cannot upgrade the mechs at this time to improve their damage tables. Fortunately, every now and then, a random encounter enemy you find is a repair bot, which will allow one to fix up the mechs by not fighting it until the mechs are back to full health. But it's not even balance. This is fortunately remedied a bit when we find someone living down in these caves, an old man named Balthazar, Ball for short, that is an old hand at repairing gears and has the components that will return the Waltall to full functionality, as well as the first round of upgrade components. More important to the main story, however, is Ball's digging up of fossils that have been found in the caves, determining from the utter lack of human fossils past 10,000 years ago that humans are non-native to this world, which thanks to the opening cutscene, we already know is because the survivors on the Eldridge led to this becoming a human colony world, but is not something common knowledge to the general populace of the world due to the various calamities and wars that the planet has been bathed in over the millennia. The problem of this, of course, is the game is consequently enabling by this framing the religious conspiracy denial of evolution being a thing and science being wrong, at least as far as humans are concerned, with God being behind why humans begin to appear and populate the planet. And well, considering the fact Deus means God, and Deus caused the destruction of the Eldridge, that isn't exactly wrong in this case. Unfortunately, 25-ish years on from the game's release, and the framing and exploration of this hasn't stopped being uncomfortable, only becoming more so as extremist zealots use their religion as an excuse to attempt to control others and deny them their freedom and rights, despite Xenogears through this attempting to showcase how monstrous religious zealotry is. It becomes a case where the moral is lost amidst those thinking that oppression is a good thing, as it forces others to believe as they do, despite the many atrocities throughout time that has caused. This is likewise shown by how the tale of the Eldridge is now framed, as a religious myth of a caring god striking down their children that gained the fruit of wisdom and burning paradise beneath the sea. This framing assuming their god was a wise and benevolent being that the people need to repent for the sin against it, not understanding that they're just being used by the spreaders of that doctrine for their own means and gain in service to the actual monster that sleeps until it's time to rise from the depths. Yeah, Cthulhu Fatagan. But Ball also has heard rumors that the reason why the various factions are so adamant to dig up the gears from the Eldridge ruins is to find and recover a fabled Omni-Gear, which has the power to rival Deus's power, and thus would decide the fate of the world as consequence. Faye wondering if one of the gears they've already obtained could secretly be this unit. Oh, hi, unsubtle foreshadowing. But because a religious sect known as the Ethos, which Shakan is a priest of and Sawara secretly controls, is very secretive about human history on this world, only the last few hundred years of human history is available, with the rest being a hidden black history no one is allowed to know the specifics of, for the sole purpose of keeping the populace ignorant and their lives under the control of the servants of Deus. Anyways, Ball tells us how to get out of the cave, which requires solving a few switch puzzles to unlock a gate to the cavern that sealed him in here as well, and fighting through the monsters that are supposed to give armor upgrades, which is where I encounter another problem that is a consequence of this game's age. A lot of the character upgrade gear, on both the squishy human side and for the mecha, is supposed to come from monster drops, and I barely saw any of that all game long. The drop rates for items were that garbage that it was rare I'd get anything to drop from an enemy encountered beyond just cash. This, for the longest time, was a problem with Square's RPGs, to the point it has been a long derided trope of theirs, but this was just egregious even for games of this era, where you were expected to have a long grind, as I could go over an hour of encounters without even a basic common item drop, let alone something rare I was required to get to move on past some obstacles. And by the time I'd finally get items from enemies, it'd be in such short supply that they didn't serve any use, or after I'd already gotten something that served as a superior replacement. So anything that actually helped me against bosses, yeah, if I couldn't find it in a chest or was buying it in a shop, I wasn't getting it without hours worth of grinding. A few endgame items I ended up doing just because they were that essential to even doing anything against the end bosses, but for the rest, I didn't even bother because the time sink was just not worth it. This shows itself in these caves as these armor upgrades are essential to actually defeating the Guardian mecha that keeps the caves safe from intruders, the Calamity. And despite it not being backed up by the Forbidden and the Raider, this thing can bust down units that do not have good armor stats or accessories. The best way around that then is just use the special text from Bart that caused the accuracy rating of enemies to drop, as Bart's skillset leaned more into buffing the party and sabotaging the enemy. Couple that with the command booster, which increases the fuel usage of a gear to in turn boost its speed and damage scores, but can be dangerous if you can't refuel the mechs, and you can make this fight more manageable. But it can be a close call since heavily armored units make certain attacks, and as said before, all of Bart's, completely worthless if they're stuck fighting a battle of attrition that can't be won without better armor we consequently cannot get. Heh, Zeke has the same mannerisms in Xenoblade 2. Everything is a referential Ouroboros in the Xeno series. With this, Bart and Faye managed to beat back up with the Yggdrasil, Satan having been taken in by them earlier and the whole misunderstanding completely sorted out. And since we have nowhere better to go right now, well, might as well become noble-intentioned pirates looking to find the greatest treasure in the universe. So, when's Bart handing over the key to the ship? The Yggdrasil after this returns to their hideout to drop off their raided resources and resupply the ship, where Bart's butler Mason gives us the down low I already explained about Bart being exiled royalty, such beginning 12 years ago, before the Ava and Kislev War reached its current stage. And with both factions being centrally focused on digging up old machines to pad their forces, well, their raids are all they really can do to disrupt the buildup of arms that's occurring, as despite the excavations, they need to still be transported. To take Shakan down now requires them to hijack as many top-rated gears as they can, so Shakan cannot use them, thus why Bart became a pirate. And worse, Shakan has a hostage, Bart's cousin Marguerite, aka Margie, from the city of Nisan. So even if Bart got the forces he needs together, any attempt to take power would be at the cost of her life. Especially since the religious sect that Margie is part of, yeah, Ava's been killing members of it on sight normally. Them spreading rumors that they've only been detained being how they caught her in the first place when she came to investigate. This is likewise not helped by the fact that Margie is the guardian of one half of the Fatima Jasper, a relic of Bart's lineage that hides a secret treasure that many believe to bear connection to the legend of the Omni Gear, or just a collection of very powerful gears from an era of the Forbidden History, with Bart in possession of the other half of that jewel. So since Shakan wants that relic, Margie's life is safe for the time being. But there's no telling when Shakan's patience will run out due to Ava's losing of the war, and turn his attention to both killing the exiled Bart to win his lineage and gain his half of the jewel, before eliminating Margie in turn. Thus, since Faye and Satan have shown themselves to be capable, Bart decides to ask them to help raid the Ava capital and get Margie out of Shakan's hands. Satan's on board, but due to everything Faye's been unjustly blamed for in what has not even been a few days, someone asking him to use his great power to save someone, yeah, he's not exactly willing. The problem with the presentation being that Faye in this incident acts like a whiny child. After all, Bart's not exactly asking Faye to kill anyone to save Margie, and actually succeeding in saving and protecting one being victimized would resolve some of the guilt complex he has over the past incidents to resolve them, and show that he can help people without atrocities happening, which would more show that the prior incidents are more the fault of others' machinations and actions. Why I dislike this is, in context, it less comes off as Faye being obstinate towards Bart, only seeming to want to use Faye's power for his own benefit, which he is against due to all the trouble that's happened recently where he fears being stabbed in the back and left out to dry. And more him being selfish and immature when someone else is in danger. That kind of, why should I help you? They're not important to me attitude that comes off as Faye not wanting to take responsibility for himself or his own actions. That feeds into that everything is Faye's fault guilt trip the game keeps shoving onto him. As if he is solely the one with the problem, and how he acts is wrong and everyone else is being reasonable. Despite, again, Faye's interactions with Bart starting from Bart antagonizing him and blaming Faye for everything, even when Bart was the one that would not stop and listen to reason. It comes off less like, say, Shinji Ikari in the early side of Evangelion where he's dropped into everything against his will and people end up harmed as consequence. Or Kira Yamato protesting being drafted into a war he wanted no part in, but still going along to protect the people important to him, as is the pragmatic way to act in such a situation. No, Instead, Faye here is showing moral cowardice, a form of hypocrisy epitomized by the likes of Suzaku Kururugi in Code Geass, Shinji Kido in Ryuki, or Amuro Ray in certain parts of Universal Century Gundam, where they claim to be a moral person, but whenever they're given an opportunity to help someone that is actually being oppressed or victimized, they end up siding with the oppressor, as from their limited restrained perception of the world, the oppressor seems like the party in the right, when from a more objective perspective, the opposite is largely true. And they consequently run away from reality not because they are cowards, but because they reject the idea that they could be in the wrong. As when you look at what is going on in the larger story, this conflict is why the massacre of Lahand Village happened, and why the surviving people like Dan wrongly blame Faye for his role in it. So to absolve the guilt that is being improperly forced upon him, shouldn't Faye want to do something to disrupt this petty struggle and throw off the chains of oppression that keep the war going? Anything else would consequently be selfishly hypocritical to his supposed beliefs and values. Not because he claims to cowardice when conflict is involved, for even a coward can be brave when another's life is in danger. But to take no action to stop something wrong, even when one has the capacity to influence it, that's a lot less endearing a position for a purported protagonist to take, especially with such coming off as spiteful towards the ones begging for their help, to the point everyone has to walk on eggshells around them. Now, to be fair...
Don't say to be fair. Hate when people say to be fair. It sounds like, to be fair.
To be fair.
Oh, to be fair.
To be fair, Faye getting over this attitude is part of his character arc with regards to him growing the fuck up and broadening his perspective of the world from the tiny dot of perception his limited small village existence has left him in, especially with the psychological trauma he has suppressed. My hang-up is, I have seen stories fuck up similar characterizations to this so many times, where they bend over backwards to justify the atrocities which this attitude displayed here enables, that I have an instinctual loathing from merely seeing it, and the holier-than-thou condemnation that accompanies it. For there is a difference between being a coward, being a pacifist, being against war, or disliking fighting, and being an arrogant son of a bitch condemning others for trying to stop the people responsible for the suffering they claim they're against, which then enables those that are doing the most wrong. You lose the right to complain about atrocities when you are given the chance to prevent them, and refuse to do anything to stop them, especially when someone is begging you for help.
Always help those who help you. That's the second rule of the Salvage's Code.
Why I feel like I ended up going off on this here when I really shouldn't be, due to Xenogears' age not being able to predict how badly other people would screw this up, is more that I saw this attitude also be seen in Xenosaga, which, as said, I've already played through, but it is utilized in the exact opposite way. That the person who wants to help people and prevent a calamity from occurring that they know will happen is treated as if it is an arrogant presumption to interfere in a preordained event, and the person is wrong for wanting to do so, which the story then bends over backwards to say that person is in the wrong. Which in reality just makes those trying to stop them, that the story is forcibly making look right, actually be assholes. And it's a good thing that this attitude is called out here, by Bart himself in fact, once Satan informs him of Faye's full situation, reminding him that Faye ignoring the suffering of others isn't going to do anything but exacerbate the weight he feels. Even saying that Faye did not need to help him. That's why Bart asked. But for Faye to condemn Bart for wanting to save someone important to him, that's just spitting on the graves of those who Faye failed before. Something Bart likewise knows, due to him remembering Shakan taking everything from him as a child, while he was helpless to do anything, and feeling a responsibility to stop however he can what the man has done. Ultimately, the decision is taken out of Faye's hands, however, when the base is attacked by Gebler forces, forcing Faye to fight again, and Citan commandeering his own gear, the Heimdall. Citan in his encounter noting that the Gibbler insurgents are using a performance-enhancing drug known as Drive, which the Solarian government forces upon their soldiers to keep them driven upon only slaughtering the lambs on the land. These battles are all pretty basic, boss battles in name only, but a story-essential one that showcases that even if Faye claims to have higher morals, there are people out there that will stoop low and harm others regardless of his moral high ground. And despite the scapegoating he suffered, there's no excuse for not helping someone when one has the capability to intervene and help. So it's time for him to get his head out of his ass and actually do something, thus resulting in the three main characters routing this assault, and Faye agreeing to help Bart save those important to him, as a show of him deciding to finally walk his own path. This gives us control of the Yggdrasil, which leaves us free to travel and fight on the world map to gain some additional levels. Nothing will attack you while you move in the Yggdrasil, yet, and getting out of it instantly puts you in the mechs, so there's no reason to not use the Yggdrasil as a mobile resupply base. Just make laps around where you get out of it to fight enemy monsters until you run out of fuel, head back to the Yggdrasil, resupply, and repeat. This is the fastest way to grind levels in the game, even though it, as said before, means you will not learn death blows needed to beat ground battle boss encounters that are commonplace for large stretches of the game. As said before, it's damned if you do, damned if you don't. The only advantage grinding like this will give you is just higher stats to deal with the ground enemies when you need to grind longer. Either way around, you will be stuck with an excessive grind. The best I can recommend is keep one character in a gear out in the overworld at all times, with the other two party members being allowed to grind out deathblow level ups. This in turn gives a bit of padding against giant enemies only gears can handle screwing over a party entirely, but becomes an even larger time sink as each battle will drag itself out by the giant enemies being capable of KOing a party in a very few number of hits if they choose to attack the ground-bound characters if you're trying to grind death blows off of them, and I speak from experience on that. Though there is something else that drove me a bit nuts, because it is an undocumented button command, at least as far as I saw, and that is the command, call gear. At any time in the overworld, you can swap characters in and out of their gears by pressing L2 and R2 at the same time on the controller. I did not see anything in the game that said I could do this. I do not own the original manual of the game, so I can't see if it was in there. And it is not in the guidebook that you can do this. Calling gears for characters on the first turn of battle can be a bit of a pain as well if you need to suit everyone up though. So since it takes a lot of screwing with menus to do a lot of this out of battle to keep one in and the rest out, it ended up just as much a time sink as doing all or none. Anyways, at this point we're off to the capital of Ava, Bledavik, to interfere with Shakan's plans. The game at this point is introducing the usurper himself and two chief officials of Solaris, Commander Karun Ramses of Giebler and his lieutenant Miang, also known as Mia Hawa. Though the kanji her name is spelled with in the Japanese version implies her name is supposed to be Mian, M-I-A-N, without the G at the end. You know, like the sound a cat makes. And doesn't Miang look like someone we've seen before? Neither Mia nor Ramses can tolerate the truly incompetent Shakan, which makes me beg the question how this idiot even managed to execute a coup. Well, it would be if, real-life events hadn't messed up with that perception. Zeltry can build up even a man that represents all of one's sins if there's enough belief in their lies. As, even with Giebler's forces bolstering Ava's own, Shakan's incompetence is permitting Kislev to outright devastate their combined forces. And the Sky Dwellers do not take well to losing to the lambs they slaughter, all because their soldiers keep being used like hammers to every problem Shakan turns into a nail. Worse, the Ethos faction has completed recovery of a new gear from the ruins that dates back to Ava's founding 500 years ago. And with the 500th anniversary celebration planned the next day, they're planning to unveil the new weapon at that time, though it still pales in comparison to whatever treasure is locked by the Fatima Jasper, which Ramses and Mian are also adamant in claiming as well, as they believe that treasure to be something called a relic, which we will get to explaining later. Fortunately, due to the celebration, outsiders from across the continent are being allowed into the capital, and there is a planned martial arts tournament part of the dedication that allows our team to sneak in unnoticed into the city, and meet with a nun from Nisan who is trying to free Margie themselves. Margie is the head priestess of the town of Nisan, where the primary religious sect dedicated to Deus has set itself up in, and Margie is considered a great holy figure as a result. While they don't have a great amount of military power, their influence is felt by both sides in the conflict, as the Nisan sect is not controlled by Solaris. So them siding against Ava for their forced imprisonment of Margie could make things even worse for the country, thus escalating the need to free her from the castle. And as said, the tournament is the perfect distraction to get the team inside. Bledavik is another case of me getting really lost in this game. Not help that the story events require you to explore everywhere beforehand to be able to figure out what the plan is, which isn't helped much by the guidebook even telling you everything you need to flag, as there's still the matter of actually finding them. One of such involves playing hide and seek with a little kid, when I just cannot figure out the freaking landmarks even with the guidebook telling me where to find the kid due to the required camera rotation making me lose sight of the ones I can remember, and the kid himself not appearing on the goddamn overworld during the game. Meaning you're blindly grasping for a specific pixel the game is suddenly flagging as valid, but will only trigger as valid when you're in a specific map orientation. And every time I find the kid, he just repeats the same information he already provided to me ad nauseum, which takes up multiple text screens so we can't even complete this quickly. There is no winning in this for me. Central to that being finding the guy who will provide a key that will open up a trapdoor to an underwater spring that runs straight through to the castle, allowing for an easy infiltration, which took me forever to find. And on top of that, being part of a distraction that is the martial arts contest, by Faye being entered in it since, well, Faye is the party's monk character, and needs no other weapons than those fists of his to harm someone. Plus, since it's a martial arts tournament, the entire point of such is to grapple with your enemy until they submit, so there is no conscientious objection to being involved in such because the other participants consented to being part of it. Thus, Faye has no valid reason to be morally opposed to such. An aspect of such I bring up because other series with similar tournaments, even if they might involve death games, forget that when one consents to being part in something like that, says there's far fewer moral grounds to object to such as long as those running the damn thing are upfront about the terms it abides by and its players are not dragging in the uninvolved. So while Faye participates and drags out his fights to keep attention on it, Bard will in turn travel through the aqueduct to reach the castle innards unmolested. The complication of this is the tournament is the first place where Don reappears, and continues to act like an ass, alongside Ramses and Miang being around to interfere with the plan, Miang in specific finding herself infatuated with Faye. Plot point. The traversal through the aqueduct, however, can end up a pain, as not only are you swimming against the current and are also trying to grab the treasure boxes that are down here, your time actually traveling through it with Bart is arbitrarily decided by however long you take to fight things with Faye. So it's actually advantageous to draw each match out to give Bart more travel time. But the more you drag it out, the more the damage Faye takes piles up. Even grinding up Faye's levels beforehand can end up working against you, as despite being able to take more hits, you consequently have to strike far less lest you kill an opponent too early, and thus leave Bart with no time to travel. It's actually beneficial to be underleveled during the tournament, but that consequently makes the following boss battles harder, as those all require you be at least level 25. Oh yeah, you're also required to be a third of the way through the required level grind of the game by this point. The game's end boss requiring you to be at least level 75 to have any chance against it. And if you've been overleveling? Sorry, while the game doesn't require you use a party member for them to get experience points, it does at the very least require them be in the party. So overleveling the ones you do have before everyone is together actually can end up harmful and require more of a time sink later. Fortunately, I was able to make it to the castle with Bart by dragging out the second match, permitting Bart to explore more of the castle completely unmolested to collect the items spread out throughout the building. though Faye's last opponent, Wise Man, is the one that gives him the most difficulty, just tanking all of Faye's blows while criticizing what this mysterious man feels when he makes contact with Faye's fists. The emotional turmoil and conflict that is just rolling under the surface. I bet he didn't realize that at any point in time where he could have done something about it. Yeah, spoilers for later. Wise Man is actually an alias taken by Faye's father Khan, who is also possessed currently by Graf. Graf only possessing him 5 years earlier in the timeline. Khan can take control for short periods, but is largely working with Graf for their mutual goal of ending the cycle Faye is being forced to be part of, which requires Faye reconcile with id, which their negligence allowed to be created. Khan is also the one who trained Faye in his martial arts skills, which, of course, involves the trope of the student not being ready to surpass the master. Khan, however, is a lighter hand than Graf is, so when Graf tries to hijack Khan once again during the tournament to throw the pressure back on Faye, Khan flees. So Faye's rendered the victor of the tournament, and Bart is out of free time to navigate the castle. This is ultimately leading to a confrontation with Ramses and Miang after Bart successfully makes contact with Margie and attempts to flee. Since once more, they can't let her be out of their grasp until they find the second Jasper to obtain their prize. Both Miang and Margie act as healers for this battle, but unfortunately taking out Miang is a very bad idea due to her far larger health pool, whereas Ramses only has 400 hit points to deal with here. So the best thing to do is build up some spare AP by not wasting it all on every attack, until the point one can string together enough combo attacks and death blows to put him down hard. Just avoid attacking Ramses when he's in his mirror stance, as that always ends up being a one-hit KO counterattack. This is actually the first of two battles, however, the second beginning after Faye arrives, and Ramses recognizing him. For 5 years before this, Faye's id self went on a rampage, with Ramses being one of the Solarians that experienced id's wrath after the persona was created, and consequently another fight ensues, with the same combo attack strategy the best way to put him down fast. From there, Faye, Bart, and Margie flee using an elevator that delivers them to the ship dock Ramses' ship is at, with Giebler's soldiers charging out of it to stop them. This ultimately leads them to bump into Ellie, who has met up with the ship after leaving Faye and Satan in the forest. She helps them avoid capture while revealing to Faye her role in Lahan's demise, trying to take responsibility for her role in the massacre. But the game's stupid insistence on scapegoating Faye for that incident has rooted itself too deeply, and he refuses to accept anyone but himself being culpable for the situation. Still, while Bart is hesitant to trust Ellie, she does ultimately get them to the gear launch docks, and gives them the codes needed to use a gear to escape. Faye tries to convince Ellie to come with them, but ultimately fails as the game has decided it is not the right time to involve her in things yet. Still, Margie's been saved, meaning the task next at hand is to return her home to Nissan. I wonder if she would prefer the top on or off. What, my dad had a T-top Nissan car when I was a kid.
That's the 6th rule of the Salvager's Code. First have a punch-out, then drink to forget. Once you've forgotten, the friendship's all set. I'm not old enough to drink yet, though.